All right, we'll get going. There's quite a bit to talk about here. It's been a long time since we've actually done a fireside chat. Um, so let's just jump in. First, I thought I'd give a sort of a state of the union where we are. Um, the first thing contextually is that there's been quite a bit of buzz around just decentralized science, DeSci. It's kind of the latest catchword in the you know, Web3, Pantheon. Um, it's a lot of hype around it, and there's a lot of stuff that's probably talked about that, looks real and isn't, but, it is a thing at this point. Um, I have to say that my opinion is that Gridcoin was the first to actually do some form of distributed or decentralized science. We invented it in 2013 with our unique approach to incentivizing point projects. So, I would call us the original, but we sort of like the United States has always been hampered by the it's being first in infrastructure with phone lines that are copper wire, um, networks that were the first and then end up being the most primitive. We have been a victim of being first in the sense that we have some of our infrastructure that's been aging and is now out of date and less capable than stuff that's built on, say, an Ethereum backbone. So um, there are these ERC20 tokens out there that have a lower hurdle to entry. They can use the virtual machine, and go on top of Ethereum, and makes it a lot easier to implement things than doing it the hard way with C++ on top of your own blockchain. So that's a challenge for us. We've also had really no real marketing activities or outreach in a while. We had a pulse of activity probably a year or year and a half ago, and then since then it's been extremely quiet. There's been continuing activity on the development front with me and Div 72 and Cyber Taylor doing some work along with a smattering of other contributors. But as far as the general intent to take the coin forward from a marketing perspective, not too much activity there. And there's also been a difference in opinion in the community on how to take Gridcoin forward, with some people advocating creating a token on top of an ERC20 token on top of, say, probably not Ethereum, but something similar to Ethereum with lower gas prices to exist our own alongside our own blockchain. Um, I'm not absolutely opposed to that, but I felt that that's sort of the cheap way out. And I've done a lot of thinking about that particular approach, and I think it diminishes the value of the traditional blockchain that we've built over the years. So I'm not really sure at the end of the day that's the right way to go. Um, on the technical front, we have the Natasha mandatory, which is coming along. That's a 5.5.0.0. This is one of the biggest we've had in a long while. If you go look at the number of closed PRs that are in Natasha already, it's 71 PRs. It's a very, very big release. Biggest we've had in a long time, probably since Fern, which was the essentially when we got rid of all of the old infrastructure that had been done by the original founder and that set of developers, and replaced it with modern, contracting that is eliminated a lot of security problems. So in the big ones, and there's lots of things about Natasha we could talk about, lots of interesting things in there. Probably the biggest three are the protocol enforced side staking, which allows us to implement via protocol mandatory side stakes. This is the beginnings of an actual treasury where we can um, direct that a certain proportion of people's uh, rewards or proof of stake earnings get sent to mandatory addresses such as the foundation fund. Uh, Second big item is the changeable emission parameters. We're going to talk about this a lot more in a few minutes. Uh, we've had a essentially a deflationary inflation for Gridcoin. Those emissions declined in the first year after the coin was converted to POS in 2014, and then those emissions have remained relatively constant over the last decade. And the coins in circulation have grown to the point where that emission rate is now less than 3% on an annual basis, and so that's really quite low. And we'll talk about what we're doing about that. The other thing I have to mention is the complete overhaul of the build system. I basically have to say Cyber Taylor did a lot of work on this earlier this year. I guess late last year, earlier this year, with the first CMake work and first stabs at QT6 compatibility. We've had several different PRs related to this merge this year, and then I just merged a giant one that puts the capstone on this to get our build system over the finish line with CMake and QT6 compatibility, and also a new CI/CD system, continuous integration, continuous development system. So this was a big one because the antiquated Auto Tools build system was I think really hampering developers wanting to come and work on a project. It's just so arcane and such a pain in the rear that people don't want to mess with it. I mean, C++ is hard enough as it is, and when you've got to deal with a dodgy, creaky build system on top of that for a giant project that's got over 3 million lines of code, it just makes it miserable. So CMake is there. It's in place. It's stable. It's working. And that's what our build system is going to be going forward, and it integrates much better with IDEs. You can pull the CMake list file automatically into IDEs, and it'll automatically set up the project for you. So that's a big thing for developers. This Natasha mandatory really forms the basis of a lot of groundbreaking changes that are going to come along later, which we'll talk about. I want to quickly go through a refresher on Gridcoin because this is the first Fireside we've done in a long time, and there are a lot of people that are new to Gridcoin that while they're participating in it, and they may have set up their beacon and being solo crunchers, they may not know the whole story about how this coin operates. So we're gonna talk about it. A little bit of history. Gridcoin was initiated in 2013. It's one of the first altcoins. It's actually not one of the first 10. I went and researched this just to check. I think we're certainly in the first 50. We are probably there's probably only 10 coins from that era that have actually survived, and we're one of them. I will point out they were older than Dogecoin, Dash, Monero, and Ethereum itself. They were all formed after us. 2014, I think our Genesis block was in October, if I remember right, of 2014. We shifted from proof of work chain, which is called Gridcoin Classic, to the proof of stake chain, which everybody is on today, and now is over 3.8 million blocks because it's been more than a decade. So what's unique about us? We have this emission mechanism that's 2 layers. At this point, you have the proof of stake layer, which is rewarding people for actually forming blocks and on the chain. And then you have the crunching layer, which is the reward for scientific or mathematical computations with BOINC or folding at home. I will point out that we can incentivize any point accruing or leaderboard system. We obviously wrote an adapter to convert the folding at home statistics over to a format that the scrapers can understand, and we could do that with other types of point accruing systems or leaderboards. So we have a quite flexible mechanism for rewarding on the second layer. A little bit about our network size, because I think, people commented, about Gridcoin as a micro cap coin. I really hate the concept of capitalization for coins anyway, because it's kind of, they're not really investments per se. If you're going to use them to transact and move, money around, you really, that's in tension with this idea of it just being an investment to hold. But I think a not much better way to look at Gridcoin is the number of nodes that we have in operation. And currently we are seeing over 3165 active nodes. I checked just yesterday. Um, that puts us, obviously Bitcoin is the most with 24,000, but that puts Gridcoin ahead of Monero and 3 times the number of nodes that Solana has. So that's a really impressive statistic that shows the size of the Gridcoin network from a node perspective, shows its broad-based and its grassroots, which I think has always been the ethos of Gridcoin. Gridcoin's always been known as essentially the most altruistic of cryptocurrencies, given its purpose and what we're trying to do, which is encourage people not to just create useless hashes, but actually do something for science or math. Right now, we're incentivizing 13 BOINC projects plus folding at home. That number goes up and down. I think it was as high as 18 a couple of years ago. And then we've had a few projects that have had to go on the gray list or been removed from the white list for various reasons. I think that, but it's been relatively stable. Projects have come on, projects have come off, but it's been hovering around the 13 to 15 for quite a while. And then I guess the last thing that was really a big deal for us, a really big deal, was when I implemented manual reward claims, MRC, back in August of 2022, which is a form of delegated staking by requests, which made us essentially the first proof of stake blockchain that has essentially a no cost barrier to entry. It's really not no cost because you have to have a GRC or two to advertise your beacon, but it really eliminates one of the biggest hurdles for Gridcoin, which was to have enough coins to actually be able to stake and claim your rewards, which historically has been exceedingly difficult. That barrier to entry has been essentially lowered to almost nothing. Few points on science contributions. We actually had via our work with Rosetta at Home, we actually helped them form the first accurate 3D model of SARS-CoV-2. That's the virus actually behind the COVID pandemic. And, as a result of that, there were 10 million plus doses of COVID-19 vaccine sold to South Korea that was based on that model that was built, which included a lot of contribution from Gridcoin participants. Einstein at Home, I think we were responsible for pulsar identification. At least one, maybe a couple, have been found based on our work, which is awesome. And then on World Community Grid, when World Community Grid had better days, we had contributed significantly to advancements in cancer marker and treatment research via and also simulation of candidate molecules for next generation solar panels. And this is just 3. There have been many others that have been contributed to both in science and math over the years by Gridcoin. I will tell you that the last time I looked, we were responsible for 20% of the entire BOINC output is linked to Gridcoin nodes that are running BOINC. So, 1/5 of the entire BOINC supercomputer is due to us. So that's an impressive statistic. A little bit on Gridcoin development. We do not have a paid development staff. It's open sourced. It's passion based. We have compensated developers from time to time on certain things out of the foundation fund. There was a significant amount of compensation that was issued for the Fern rewrite and some follow-on activities after that, the straightening out of the GUI. But since then, really, there's been no funding. We do fund infrastructure, folks that are running staking node, scraper nodes, are funded, as well as the folks that run the Gridcoin stats, and also our mail system and some other odds and ends are funded. But we're not really doing development funding. We have approved community funding for bounties, so we will pay bounties for certain things on a pre-agreed basis. So, we are doing a little bit of funding, but this is not a paid staff that works here right now. Few things about this too. We actually implemented side stake. I wrote this, by the way. It was based on a mechanism that was first implemented by Pinkcoin. I took that as inspiration, changed it a bit because I felt it needed a little bit of a different approach for us, and implemented side staking back in 2018. That enabled people to automatically contribute to causes of their choice. So that could be paying a particular developer by side staking to an address that they gave, or paying to the foundation fund. So that was really a big help to help offset the drain on the foundation fund for various different expenses. And then finally, the other big one related to the treasury type functions was the manual reward claims, which went live in 2022. I wrote that as well. And those really lay the foundation for future treasury structures. I thought I'd put the MRC stats that this is up to date as of earlier today. We've paid out 5,580 MRC claims for a total of over 2.64 million GRC in research rewards. 286,000 GRC have gone to the foundation as the foundation fee cut, and 71.5 thousand have gone to various stakers that staked the MRC on behalf of the requester, as a reward for them staking the block, and then also taking the trouble of paying the MRC back their due from generated coins. So the net to the researchers was 2.28 million GRC. And by the way, you can take the ratio of that to give you an idea of what the average realization is. So that's 2.28 over 2.64. So that's 86%. So the overall fee percentage is hovering around 13.6%, which is far lower than the maximum fee that MRC can do, which is 40%. So, I'm gratified that people are disciplined enough to keep their hand off that MRC submit button until much more than 2 weeks go by. So that's a really good thing. So in fact, I could tell you that means that more than 41 days are elapsing on average between payments with MRC. So that means that people are being very disciplined about submitting those, and that's exactly what we wanted. We didn't want people to be pressing the button too often. And so, I think a number of people, the average interval between MRC payments being right at 40 days is a great number. That's exactly what we wanted, something like once a month. So that's super. The whole point with our development is to really focus on what makes us unique. We're not going to do stuff that's been done, in a lot of other places. We've always been a unique coin. A little bit about on-chain voting. I believe, there are some other coins that have done some work in on-chain voting. I would say that ours is very, very sophisticated, and is unique in the way it's implemented. It is a true on-chain voting mechanism. It's not a side chain. It's not something done that looks like it's on the chain, but not really on the chain. It is on the chain. All polls and votes are validated. The attestments are checked by the nodes. Those are cross-checked. And so, this is one of the things in Fern was to straighten out a lot of the voting problems in the original implementation. We did that. But this is a unique aspect of Gridcoin that allows us to Um, through number one, allow the community to provide feedback to developers. We can have polls that are actually protocol polls, development polls that allow us to steer the development of Gridcoin. We can create different polls to trigger the release of funds for the foundation, to allow the community to pay, do major payments to things. Um, it's been the poll and voting has been a really, really important component of allowing us to seek common ground on sticky issues and get to a place where we can move forward with a mandatory without the possibility of a true fork. And that's really why Gridcoin has avoided a lot of the very, very difficult situations with other altcoins where effectively the coin's forked into two or more because people didn't agree on the way forward. And I think our polls and voting were a big part of have been a big part of making us keep the chain in one piece. We also use polls to whitelist projects. So this is a big governance component for us. And as we're going to talk about later with our new changeable emission parameters, this is going to enable us as a community to vote on changes in the inflation rate over time, where that number is essentially at least the absolute emission rate remain constant for over a decade. This is just a simple block diagram to sort of remind people of the different parts of Gridcoin. You have the blockchain itself, and along with its economic protocols that are built in. You've got incentivization mechanisms, which have to be captured by the oracles. You've got beacons, which connect participants to the network. And then you've got the statistic providers, which are the projects that actually are issuing and then recording credit for the work, doing validation of the scientific or mathematical work, and then recording credits for that, which are then picked up by the oracles and incentivized by the blockchain. So these are all connected together. There are other things you could put in here, but these are the big ones. Statistics providers. Everyone thinks about these as projects, and that's probably the right way to think of it. But it can be more general than that. Basically, anything that can essentially accrue points and do it by a uniquely identified individual that can be correlated with a beacon could be a provider to Gridcoin. So, a good example is we have to use an adapter, but we actually brought folding at home in a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, um, via converting its foreign statistics into a form that the Gridcoin network could understand, and essentially folding at home now appears alongside the other BOINC projects as a peer level project. These are approved by a network-wide vote after being vetted by the core team to make sure that they meet the project approval requirements. So there are specific requirements that we look for to make sure that a project is on the up and up, has integrity, and can scale with the demands of the network. Because one of the things about Gridcoin is that we pack a punch, right? When historically we put a project on the network, a lot of people want to participate, and a project that's not set up to handle that load can easily be squashed by the demand of Gridcoin coming online. So careful vetting is done of projects to make sure that they can handle it from an infrastructure perspective, that the project has integrity, and that they're checking the work appropriately so that we don't have situations where there's fraud. Talk about the beacon. This has been this is a point that probably confuses newcomers the most. You have to be able to correlate scientific work on one hand with a unique individual or wallet on the other in such a way that when the scrapers pick up the work from the project, that you know you can allocate it towards uh, that that person that's or that the wallet represents, right? And so essentially the way the beacon works is that there is a public and private key pair. Essentially, it's essentially just like any other key pair in the wallet, except that that particular key pair was used to advertise a beacon on the network. So that beacon is advertised on the network. There's a special transaction for that in the contract system, and as part of that, it's signed by the key, the private key that is used to form the beacon. And then, that public key is available for inspection. Um, this allows any node on the network to correlate to that beacon ID. And, that's why you can think of it as like advertising your beacon. You're putting the beacon out there for everyone to see. And since that beacon is tied to the cross-project identifier in BOINC, it allows us to correlate the contributions that are published along that CIP-D by the various BOINC projects and the beacon holder, and allows nodes to reward the beacon holder the rewards. Now, normally, if you're staking the rewards yourself, you're essentially self-rewarding, right? You're generating the coins, you're rewarding them to yourself, and but that has to be checked by the other nodes. Someone could pay themselves, an arbitrary amount of money, and if there's no way for other nodes to check that, you could create fraud in the Gridcoin system willy-nilly. So in the original case of staking your own rewards, the claim that can be cross-verified by every single node in the network, and it is. And if any node finds a problem, it can reject that block and that transaction, which means that block is thrown out. So, the other good thing about the beacon correlation is it allowed us to implement MRC. Because the beacon correlation is inspectable, the MRC system was set up so that the only destination address for payment of MRC is the beacon address that is in the manual reward claim request. So when someone submits an MRC request, they will sign it. Essentially, they include their beacon in the signature. And that allows the payer, who's the delegated staker, the staker who's going to stake the MRC and pay the original requester back, it allows that staker to verify that the MRC is indeed from who they say it is, and it also locks them into paying back the MRC to the original requester. Now, by the way, all the other nodes in the network inspect the whole thing. They check not only the origination of the MRC request, but they also verify that the staker is actually paying back the manual reward claim money due back to the MRC requester at the correct address and at the correct amount. So the bottom line is the MRC system is set up watertight so that no one can basically submit a fake MRC transaction with a wrong, like a bad address for payment to route money back to them, or a false amount that's not in accordance with the MRC protocol. All that stuff is checked so that only MRC transactions, requests and payment transactions that are actually valid in accordance with the accrual rules actually get paid. That was a difficult amount of coding to do all that, by the way, to implement delegated staking on top of a traditional, layer one protocol like we did. A little bit about scrapers. We have one of the only true federated Oracle systems in operation. You may have read white papers about it. You've heard about oracles. Most of the time, the way oracles are implemented, they're single points of entry, conduits from off-chain data onto the blockchains. We have true federation here. So right now there are 6 authorized oracles, scrapers on the mainnet. Um, each of those oracles independently collects, hashes, signs, and publishes the project statistics to the network. And those statistics are sent out via the gossip protocol, that same protocol that sends out blocks and transactions between node to node, also sends the project statistics and what we call the manifests, which are the collection of statistics that form a particular snapshot. And then every node is responsible for verifying that the scrapers were authorized to send, and then verifying that the data matches to the standard of 60, the ceiling of 60% of the number of scrapers agreeing. So in the case of 6 scrapers, that would be 4 out of 6 have to agree on to the bit, to the hash on the statistics information they've collected. So that really allows us, in combination with the fact that we've uh, uh, had trusted members of the community, long-standing trusted members of the community that we know are independent, host the scrapers. Number one, we know they're independent, and number two, we don't have to depend on any one of them for being accurate. So there's no trust requirement per se on any individual scraper, other than the fact that the network has made sure that they're not poisoned, meaning that they're not owned by the same individual, so that they're effectively independent from one another. So other than that independence requirement, there is no trust requirement for these scrapers, and that essentially allows them to be transparent. So this now goes back to, you've removed the risk or worry around the collection mechanism, and you've now shifted it to the question about the project's integrity themselves. Oh, the other thing I'll say about scrapers too is the scrapers do snooping and snapshotting. So they actually look at the e-tag of all the project statistics files, and if they've seen the same e-tag before, they're not going to pull the statistics again. And so the scrapers are engaging in a highly optimized form of caching, and they also compress all the statistics that come over the network. So, we had a huge problem early on when I first started getting involved in Gridcoin, where the nodes, every single node in the network was requesting project statistics individually, and it was killing the project servers. We were effectively doing DDoS attacks on the projects. That's one of the reasons why PrimeGrid decided not to have Gridcoin participate anymore. So, the scrapers were our answer to not only fixing the compliance issues and integrity issues with statistics, it also made it extremely scalable. So we've reduced our demand to almost a whisper in terms of the load on the project servers to do stats collection. Current incentive layer, I think this is important just to talk about. We've had uh, a 2-layer system for a while. It's roughly distributed 25%, 75%. 25% of it goes to stakers. That's that 10 GRC constant block reward. And the remainder it goes to research rewards for crunchers. And that is set based on 1/4 of the magnitude of the network, of the whole network, which for historical reasons is 115,000. So the actual amount of GRC on the average distributed to crunchers per day is 115,000 divided by 4. That's going to be changing. We're going to talk about this in a little bit. These numbers have remained the same for forever, over a decade, and it's time to make some changes. We'll talk about what that's going to be. Incentive mechanism, a little bit about magnitude. This is other point of confusion by new folks. Magnitude is a tough concept to get across to brand new folks, but when you start grappling with the problem, you realize that this is actually the easiest, quite frankly, one of the only fair ways to reward projects that have disparate scoring mechanisms that are not normalized. So, originally when BOINC was first created in the old days, and I've been around since its foundation, the original name for credits were cobblestones. And the thought behind that is all the credits were going to be effectively standardized in terms of the way they were rewarded. Nothing of the sort came to pass. The Number one, some projects are using GPUs, other projects are using CPUs. The types of algorithms that they're implementing are completely varied. The problems they're trying to solve are completely varied. One credit on one project has nothing to do with a credit on another project in terms of like some sort of normalization scale. Now we've looked at, I like chocolate. Levi Rybolov has looked at a number of different ways to make this better. Some very sophisticated things he came up with, some great ideas that I thought had a lot of merit, but ultimately we just haven't implemented them because my feeling on it is at the end of the day they're just really, really complicated and hard to understand. And magnitude itself, as it is today, is probably the simplest fair mechanism we can use to reward projects on the network, and it is hard to understand by newcomers. So, the idea of replacing that with something that's even more inscrutable, that's even harder for people to wrap their arms around, to me is dangerous and probably counterproductive at the end of the day. What does magnitude do? Effectively, you can think of it this way: is we know because remember we're rewarding people that have active beacons. We know the researchers' contributions to each one of those projects. We know how many credits they're generating. We know what the RAC is, the recent average credit, which is that 7-day half-life moving average, exponentially decaying average that they use on BOINC to calculate a recent contribution rate. So you take the RAC due to all the participants on each project, and you can then figure out, okay, well, this is what RAC corresponds to all of the participants. And what you do is you can then normalize the RAC of each person. First of all, each project is going to get a constant, even amount of network magnitude. So you have 115,000 points, network magnitude points. If you have n projects, each project is going to get allocated 115,000 divided by n magnitude. That allocation is effectively even across all projects. So all projects get the same reward on a daily basis. And then we take that allocation to the project, which is 1 over n times the whole network's magnitude. We take that allocation to the project and we figure out based on a ratio, okay, this is what this person's RAC is. This is what the RAC is of all participants on that project that have active beacons. You take that ratio and you multiply it times the amount of network magnitude allocated to the project, and that's what the person's magnitude is for that particular project. You add that person's magnitude up across all projects, that's the person's total magnitude. And oh, by the way, when you add up all the magnitudes for all the people, you come back to essentially 115,000 because you've set it up that way. So this effectively creates a square grid where you've essentially chopped up all the magnitude, 115,000, equally among projects, but you've chopped it up among individuals based on their ratioed contribution to the network. Why do we do this? Because this is the only way that you can effectively, add up apples, oranges, and pears, right? Which is otherwise you can't add up credits directly because they're not rewarding the same thing. It would be like adding dollars to francs to rubles without doing a conversion rate. So that's magnitude. And by the way, magnitude is this is what's effectively the scrapers are collecting stats and converting it into a magnitude map. And then the nodes are checking that and making sure that that's right to a bit. And then once a day, essentially 24 hours after the last one, the network freeze dries that magnitude into place in a superblock. And then that super block, which is staked by whatever node it happens to be on point doing the stake when that 24 hours elapses, that super block information is then used by every node to compute the reward accruals for everybody on the network. And by the way, since every node's got the same information and is agreed upon all this, every node's going to arrive at the same answer for all the accruals on all the people that are participating in the network, and they can also cross-check each other's work. By the way, there's a big difference between this and, for example, Curecoin, which really implements a centralized reward system on top of a blockchain, right? So there's a central point of failure there where they've got machinery in the background that's effectively a service operating off to the side, which is doing all these computations and then effectively rewarding on the blockchain based on that computation. But that computation is centralized, whereas in Gridcoin it's not, which is a big difference. Much harder to do it this way, by the way. We've already talked about the equal apportionment. By the way, the 1 over n and equal distribution is an important component because this really helps reduce or eliminate what I call the stampede problem, which is, you always get a flood when you have a new project that comes on. There's typically a flood, but it typically stabilizes very quickly because as people flood into that project, they're only going to get a certain amount of magnitude anyway, right? They're only getting 1 over n. And so if you got 1,000 people that suddenly start participating on that project because it's new, their magnitude is going to go down because it's relative to everybody else. And so when their magnitude goes down, they go, oh, I could get paid more if I go back onto one of my other projects. And so it forces people to leave. So effectively what it does is it really creates a self-balancing mechanism that helps spread out the contributors across all the projects and ensures that every project gets a reasonable amount of computational power, which I think is a really good benefit of this quite simple 1 over n system we have. Couple of things about security. First we have a pretty strong emphasis on reliability, availability, security, and scalability, RAS. When we as a network vet a project for whitelisting and then put it up on a poll for approval. And I think that vetting process is important. We have had projects that have been removed from the whitelist because they've degraded, either haven't met scalability requirements or the availability requirements. Some temporarily, which is what we call the gray list, or some permanently, which is de-whitelisting. We have a very, I would say there's a pretty good scrutiny by people that are on the network about the work that's going on. The good thing about this is lots of folks on the network are actually interested in the scientific work they're producing, and they're watching out with eagle eyes on anomalies. I can tell you that I can count on one hand over the last 10 years issues that we've had where we thought there might be fraud involved in someone getting rewarded stuff for fraudulent work. In general, the Gridcoin reward system and the project ecosystem that surrounds it has been remarkably trouble-free in terms of this type of thing, despite the concerns that some folks over at Prime Grid had around that. The other thing about that idea of having many projects, n number of projects on the approved list, is it distributes the risk to each one, and so the overall risk is really 1 over n, right? So you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. Someone might ask, well, why can't we directly prove the work on the chain? Well, that's not easy. In fact, for a general scientific problem, it's impossible. Not only can you not create a general proof on chain of work that's done off chain without redoing the work again, you can't produce a zero knowledge proof that's in general able to prove that the work was done properly without having some knowledge of what was actually done to actually arrive at the answer. And so the general import of that is if you're going to move to direct on-chain validation of scientific work, it really, really, really constrains the chain to certain specific types of problems and makes it very and really harms the scalability of the chain. So, that's a big deal. And that's one of the reasons why we use this approach of vetting the projects, making sure they do wingman, which is, they're sending out the same work unit to two or more computers and making sure the results match before they actually give credit, things like that. We think that's a better approach than trying to build all the proof on chain, which really hampers scalability and quite frankly is intractable for general scientific problems. All right, we're going to shift gears a little bit here, and we're going to talk about the roadmap. First part, a little bit about Natasha in particular. The first comment I'll make is, and this is not in sequential order because we've done different components of this at different times throughout the last interval of time since we had a major release. But we've completely modernized the build system, as I talked about earlier. We have implemented changeable emission protocols. Going to talk about that in a minute. And then finally, we've implemented a mandatory side stake capability as part of the Treasury Foundation work to allow us to implement actual true Treasury protocols on the network. Let's talk about the roadmap. First part, phase one, which is really Natasha. Big thing here is the emission rate reset. So if folks go back and look at the Gridcoin task issue 268, there was a long treatise by R on the history of the Gridcoin emissions, its payouts, and why after more than a decade this has gone to a point of where it's really too low to support incentivizing new participants. Our inflation, or the annual percent increase of coins in circulation based on generation, is lower than 3% now. I think it's 2.8%. That's really, really low. And this number has been fixed for over a decade. So part of the solution is to agree on changes to those numbers. And then the other part of it is to implement it in such a way that the community can agree to change it in the future without having to undergo another hard fork to do it, which is historically every time we wanted to mess with this, it requires a hard fork to do it. What we want to be able to do is vote, approve, and then implement without a hard fork. And that's what we've accomplished with these changeable emission rates. So it doesn't mean we're going to change it willy-nilly, but because if you go look at a government's poll requirement, the participation requirements are pretty steep. Not as steep as a development or a protocol poll, but steep. So that you have to have the community that actually votes on participating on this to be able to change the protocol numbers here. But so it's not willy-nilly. No one can just go make arbitrary changes. But at the same time, it prevents us from having to do an entire mandatory upgrade just to change these numbers. We're actually testing this on testnet now. So what's on testnet actually has the changeable emission rates code in it. And the emission rates have already been changed for quite a while on testnet to agree with the new emission numbers, which we're going to talk about next slide after this one. So I just wanted to show you the three polls that were implemented that basically approved this from a community perspective. So we had the original rebalancing poll, which was the concept of actually rebalancing the reward and vote calculations. So in general, the feeling was there was too much of the payout going to crunching rewards and not enough to staking. 75-25 split. So we wanted to go to a golden ratio approach, which actually boosts up the CBR side a little bit. And then the second thing was, that was approved, by the way, over 42.7% of active vote weight approved. Determining consensus on future staking magnitude rewards. This referred to the amount that we were going to increase the emission rate. So that represents the total ratioed increase. So it's a 400% increase, 500% ratio to the original emission rate. This was the choice, the lead choice. This was a plurality by a hair. And so we had to have another poll to determine whether we're going to use proportional representation or first past the post. And by a far majority, first past the post won, and this was an absolute majority that won this. So everyone selected that the top answer, whichever the top plurality answer was on the previous poll, was going to get it. So that means we implemented 500%, or in other words, a 400% increase on top of the existing emission rate. So that's what's Natasha's going to include. Natasha includes the code for this. And then we do administrative contracts shortly after the Natasha hard fork. Literally we can do it the next block or the same block to change these parameters to be from the old emission parameters to the new ones. For anyone that's interested in the gory details, this is a spreadsheet that I did that shows the emission rates, where they're going to. There were two different choices here. One was based on the first past the post. The other was based on proportional representation. The one that we chose was the FC. So that's, we're going to go from 10 blocks for every block staked to 76.2937. And then the magnitude unit is going from 1/4 to 1.030504. You can see the total emission rates are going up by 400%, right? So that's a factor 5 change ratioed in emission rates. This may seem like a lot. It's not really a lot in the sense that our current inflation is so low at less than 3%, like 2.8%. This only goes up to 14 or 15%. And then it actually declines over the next 4 or 5 years down to like 5 or 6%. So it's not as much as you would think it is. Few different points. Number one, it allows us to put more hands in the pocket of crunchers and stakers. It allows us to distribute more coins to folks other than some of the whales that originate from the Gridcoin Classic era, which still probably have too much of a shadow on the network, despite our distributed nature. So there's a lot of good things about this. And by the way, it's approved by the community, so we're moving forward. Phase 2, friction reduction. So Natasha's time frame, which is including all of that I've just talked about, is probably 1 or 2 months from now. We got to get through the testnet phase. We've been having a flutter problem with the auto gray listing. I think I've found the problem for that. I'm going to be posting a fix for that soon, which is going to require a testnet mandatory. We're going to have to run with that for a couple of weeks or so, see if that works. If it solves the auto gray listing problem, then we're ready to go for Natasha, and we will set up a mandatory. The mandatory itself will probably be in a couple of months, and then we have to have a month post-mandatory period where the protocol doesn't change. That's the grace period, right, to allow everybody to upgrade before we actually implement the new protocol. In other words, shift to V13 blocks. So that will be, probably 3 months from now when we actually are on the new protocol for real. After that, we're working on phase 2, which is, I call it friction reduction. This is the opossum milestone. So that corresponds to effectively the 5.6.0.0 mandatory, which will be the next mandatory after Natasha. So few big ones. We are in the process, and there is actually a PR already up for part of this. There's going to be 3 PRs, I think, that Div 72 is working on. We are porting over the new scripting mechanisms in Bitcoin to support true hash time lock contracts. So this effectively, what this means is you can lock up coins that are associated with a particular hash uh, to be for a certain amount of time, right? And one of the big things this enables us to do atomic swaps, which enables us to support peer-to-peer trading, do cross-chain trading without centralized bridges, and also much more easily support distributed exchanges, which I think is critical for the future of Gridcoin. We can even support Lightning or Lightning-like transaction aggregation protocols on top uh, for with once we've got the HTLC implemented. So this is a big one. Um, and by the way, HTLC will be required by something, the next layer reward system, which I'm going to talk about at the end. So second big one in phase two is the BOINC proof of account ownership. So we've had the beacon process is not easy, right? You have to advertise your beacon. And number one, you got to have your BOINC system straight, and you've got to have your CPID squared away. And the CPID has to be stabilized before you can really advertise your beacon. Otherwise, you might be advertising your beacon on the wrong CPID, and which is a source of frustration for people. And then the other thing about the beacon is the verification code that you have to post in your project, one or more projects on BOINC, and then wait for it to come back through the block, the scrapers, and be posted on the blockchain and approved and act for your beacon to be activated. It's just a pain. And so the BOINC proof of account code was merged actually a couple of years or so ago on the BOINC side. No BOINC projects were actually using it, but there are, I think the Minecraft project is, and it looks like it's at a point where we need to support this, meaning that people that use BOINC proof of account could shortcut the process of activating a beacon to effectively a one-step process or two-step process. So we're implementing BOINC proof of account ownership is a big thing for us. We're going to be in a hybrid mode for quite a while where we support a combination of the traditional approach and the BOINC proof of account ownership approach. And we're looking at the best way to do that because there'll be a significant transition period where all projects don't support the proof of account ownership. So uh, that's coming to pass as part of the friction reduction. The other thing related to that is we want to improve the UI and user experience, the user experience in general around getting Gridcoin off the ground. It is a complex undertaking for people to set up solo crunching. And, I've heard that loud and clear. We've done some improvements on it, but still the wizard that we use, the gear icon, is still a little kludgy and really doesn't deal with all the corner cases. And still, folks get confused or stuck and have to be helped to try and get things set up. And it's just not a good experience. So, we're going to be working as a side aspect of BOINC proof of account ownership, we're going to be working on the UI to try and improve the setup of the Gridcoin uh, with integration with BOINC so that it's a lot easier. Phase three. So this would be the next mandatory after that. We haven't named a milestone for that one yet. Have to get Ravon to come up with one. 5.7.0.0. This is really where we implement the benefactor contract work that my son did on that a while back. I shared the document again for folks. We have effectively we needed that HTLC support to be able to buy and lock. So the idea is, institutions or donors would effectively buy in to this is a benefactor. They create a benefactor account. They buy Gridcoin and lock it in place, and then the crunchers are then going to unlock or earn those GRC out of those accounts, which essentially represents movement of GRC from the institutions or donors to the crunching participants. This really allows a full ecosystem around crunching, and turns this into a true ecosystem around computation, right? And the details of the economics are designed to create a price floor around it. One of the problems that you have with a traditional approach to block, this type of incentives is that it regresses to the mean of zero profitability, right? So, essentially, um, enough crunchers will flood in until basically the reward to each cruncher is at or below what their costs are, which then causes people to leave until it rebalances. And so, unless you have other mechanisms to control the number of people that are contributing, which you can see in this paper, there's some very sophisticated approaches to this. You will always end up in a situation where people essentially the level of participation uh, increases to the point where the profitability goes to zero for the participation. And by the way, even if we increase the emission rates, which we're doing to increase participation and also rebalance the coins across different nodes in the network, we still have this problem of regression to zero profitability for users over a long period of time, simply because that's the dynamics of the network. So we really, need to implement this layer 3 to achieve a closed loop system and balance the network operation. So that's a big one. This is probably, to give you an idea, this is probably phase 2 is probably end of next year, realistically, middle to end of next year, and then phase 3 would be a late 2026, early 2027 type of thing. Look, these could go faster if I had more people helping, but we don't have a lot of people helping in development right now. So, a little bit of a thing too. I've been thinking about ways to address potentially scalability problems that could occur in the future. We're storing our super block information on chain directly in the block. That places limits on the size of the super block, and also places restrictions on what kind of details we can put in the super block to support some more sophisticated reward schemes, and balance. Then puts the number of contributors, crunchers, beacons we can support in tension with the details that we're running, right? So that there's a lot of trade-offs there. One idea is to move that super block off chain, much like SegWit, segregated witness, does in Bitcoin. Essentially, take that super block data, allow it to be passed around in the gossip protocol, but then persisted by each node only in level DB off the chain, but keep the hashes and signatures on the chain so that any node can request that information from another node via the gossip protocol, and also verify that the copy of the information they got from some other node's local copy is correct, because it passes the hash check and the signature check. So we're going to be looking at moving certain things off the chain in a way that doesn't reduce security, to improve the scalability of the coin and remove restrictions on super blocks, which is going to become a problem given everything that we're trying to support. The other thing is that we're going to be exploring blockchain pruning. Blockchain pruning is not easy with a proof of stake coin like ours, but it's not impossible. And we're going to be looking at that. Our chain is really long. We're lucky in that it's not long and big, meaning there are not lots of transactions in each block. But nevertheless, with over 3.8 million blocks, there's still a lot of blocks. It's a lot of blocks to check. It's a lot of blocks to load. A lot of blocks to maintain maps in memory, because the hash map has to be maintained in memory of all those blocks, the index, and that just takes up space. And it ends up, over time, despite our best efforts to keep the memory usage under control, and we've done several debloating exercises of the wallet from a memory consumption perspective over the past few years. Nevertheless, the memory usage is going to continue to slowly rise on the with Gridcoin's node, as the chain continues to get longer. So, we have to be looking at ways to mitigate that over time, or eventually it's going to become a problem. Finally, exchange listings. It's about once every week somebody comes on the Discord and asks, okay, when are we going to get on Binance, or when are we going to get on Coinbase, or when are we going to be on the X exchange of the day in terms of hot exchanges? And I guess I'm old enough. I'm in the grumpy phase, and the fact is that people ask those questions, and they're not really thinking clearly about what needs to be done to get on a major exchange. First question you got to ask is, do you really want to be on one? Right? There's a whole question around speculation and whether we really want to be a fad. That's set that one aside. If we're going to get on a major exchange, we're going to have to pay for a legal opinion with what's called the Howey test. And by the way, a Howey test is a test. There's like 10 points on it, but you need to fail the Howey test. So, the first thing I hear is when I hear someone say, well, we need to pass the Howey test. Well, when I hear someone say that, that means they never read the Howey test, because what you want to do is fail the Howey test. If you pass the Howey test, that means you're an investment. So you need to fail the Howey test. So the whole idea is to get a legal opinion to make sure that we do not meet the Howey points, right? We want to fail it. And that proves that we're not an investment. And so, that we need a formal legal letter to do that. That will not just be issued out of hand. They have to actually do a review. It's a significant undertaking with a significant cost associated with it. The minimum I've ever seen to get a Howey test done is $25K, and that's from a second or third rate law firm. Chances are it's going to be much more expensive than that to get done. So, and 25K, I mean, not Gridcoin, I'm talking about dollars. Next thing we need to do is we've got to implement, really need phases 1 and 2 of what I've talked about today to get done before we try and get on an exchange. That's got to get done. And then finally, we've really got to wrap this technical work we're doing with a solid marketing plan, solid plan for community involvement, and really, quite frankly, some perseverance by community members to not only, take the bull by the horns and drive this, but stay involved. Because one of the things I've noticed is that we have these spurts of activity that happen in Gridcoin, and people rush around like mad doing things, and then it just exponentially decays. And then all that work that was done ends up going, into the garbage can because people don't keep it up, right? If you're going to be involved in this thing, you got to stay involved. I've been involved. I now have been involved long enough that I can stand on the high ground on this. You go back and look at my commit record, all the way back to 2018 or before, right? I've been involved in this thing for a long time, and I've maintained my involvement, and I've been working on it steadily over the years. We need people to do that. This is not a flash in the pan thing. Gridcoin's been around a long time. We need people with staying power that will get involved and stay involved and see things through. And so that's what I'm looking for. We need, if you're one of those folks that want to be involved, want to actually do stuff, we want you. We have as I said, we've got an extraordinary node count. We've got a big community. This is the envy of a lot of other coins. What we lack in market capitalization, we have in terms of grassroots. We just need community action and engagement. Can't just be done by me and a few other people doing development activities and other things around that. That's not gonna get us where we need to go. And there's lots of work to be done that is not technical, it is not development related. Marketing, outreach, community work, help, support, all that kind of stuff is non-coding related activities, documentation, uh, website upkeep. Barton, for example, there's a little bit of coding involved in that. Barton has been over the years maintaining the website. He doesn't get paid for that. He gets paid for hosting um, his scraper node. But a lot of people are still doing stuff to maintain the network activities, and they're not getting paid. We need folks to make that count and get us down the road. We've got to have folks really working hard on figuring out what the next steps are as we get this technical work done. How do we get this actually implemented, get it real, and actually get real stuff built on top of it? I'll give you an example. We build the HTLC support, which allows atomic swaps to occur. Well, nothing's going to happen as on its own. We then have to decide, okay, well, we're going to allow distributed exchanges, and if so, which ones are we going to go after? Are we going to try and link up with some other blockchain? Are we going to try and implement the Lightning Network? If so, is there, it's not just limited to this benefactor layer that I talked about, which is a true reward ecosystem around Gridcoin's central thesis. There's lots of things that can be done with some of the tools that we're talking about in this presentation that would actually have positive reinforcement on the coin and community, but they require effort and work to actually get those done. So anyway, that's it. That's the presentation. That's all I got. I'll open it up for questions. If you guys have any questions or thoughts. God, not a single person responding. I must have talked people to death. Well, I've got this recorded, so I'm gonna put this up somewhere so people can see it, and you've also got the presentation to look at. So we're gonna be a little bit more formal about these than we have in a while, because I think it's important from a community participation standpoint. But thanks everyone for participating, and looking forward to seeing you at the next one. Hopefully we'll have more participants at the next one. Appreciate it.